For 30
My lord, the
years,
assembly
lighthouse
is ready.
keeper Samuel
Very
Torres
good.
had
Let
guided
the
ships
ceremony
safely
commence,
through the
as you
treacherous
wish, my
waters
lord.
of Crescent Bay.
At ease,
Every
young
night,
man.
his
A
beacon
fine
cut through
salute.
the darkness, a
Thank you,
steady
sir.
pulse of
It
hope
is an
against
honor.
the storm-battered cliffs. But on the night of
Stop
October
right there.
15th,
This
something
area is off
extraordinary
limits.
happened that would change not just Samuel's life, but the fate of an entire coastal town. What Samuel discovered in the hidden chamber beneath his lighthouse wasn't just a secret. It was a mystery that connected the present to a forgotten tragedy and held the key to saving lives that hung in the balance. This is the story of how one man's curiosity about strange sounds in the night led to the most significant archaeological discovery on the eastern seaboard, and why powerful people would do anything to keep it buried. The October wind howled across Crescent Bay with unusual ferocity, sending salt spray against the lighthouse windows in rhythmic crashes that Samuel Torres had grown accustomed to over his 3 decades as keeper. At 62, Samuel had weathered countless storms from his perch atop the 90-foot tower, but tonight felt different. The beam from his lighthouse swept across the churning black waters in its eternal rotation, casting brief glimpses of the merchant vessels and fishing boats that sought safe passage through these notorious waters. Samuel descended the spiral staircase from the lamp room, his weathered hands gripping the iron rail as he made his way to the watchroom below. The lighthouse had been automated years ago, but Samuel remained as the sole caretaker, a living piece of maritime history in an increasingly digital world. The Crescent Bay Lighthouse had stood since 1847, its red brick exterior weathered but sturdy, its Fresnel lens still capable of projecting light 20 miles out to sea. As Samuel settled into his evening routine of checking weather instruments and updating the log, he heard something that made him pause. Beneath the constant moan of wind and crash of waves, there was another sound, a rhythmic tapping that seemed to come from somewhere below. At first, he dismissed it as the old building settling, or perhaps debris striking the foundation, but as the minutes passed, the sound continued with an almost deliberate pattern: 3 quick taps, a pause, then 3 more. Samuel had lived alone in the lighthouse for 15 years, ever since his wife Margaret passed from cancer. He'd grown comfortable with solitude, finding peace in the predictable rhythm of his duties and the endless horizon that stretched beyond his windows. But this sound was new, and it troubled him in a way he couldn't quite explain. Moving to the ground floor of the lighthouse, Samuel grabbed a heavy flashlight and his toolkit. The lighthouse sat on a rocky outcropping connected to the mainland by a narrow stone causeway that disappeared during high tide. The building itself was constructed on a foundation of massive granite blocks, with a basement that housed equipment and storage. Samuel had explored every inch of the structure countless times, but the tapping seemed to be coming from somewhere even deeper. In the basement, Samuel knelt beside the eastern wall, pressing his ear against the cold stone. The tapping was definitely coming from behind the wall, but that was impossible. There was nothing but solid rock on the other side. He ran his hands along the mortar joints, looking for any sign of hollow space or hidden openings. The original builders had done their work well. The stones fit together with precision that modern construction rarely matched. As Samuel examined the wall more carefully, his flashlight beam caught something unusual. One of the granite blocks, about 3 feet from the floor, had mortar around its edges that looked different from the rest. Where the other joints showed the weathering and discoloration of nearly 2 centuries, this mortar appeared newer, perhaps only decades old rather than generations. The tapping came again, and this time Samuel was certain it was coming from directly behind this particular stone block. He fetched a small pry bar from his toolkit and began carefully chipping away at the mortar. The work was slow and difficult. Whoever had sealed this stone had done so with the intent that it should never be opened again. After nearly 2 hours of careful work, Samuel had cleared enough mortar to attempt moving the block. Using the pry bar as a lever, he applied steady pressure until the massive stone shifted slightly. A rush of stale air escaped from behind the wall, carrying with it the musty smell of long enclosed spaces and something else, the faint scent of the sea, but different somehow. Older. With considerable effort, Samuel managed to slide the block far enough aside to create an opening large enough for a man to squeeze through. His flashlight beam penetrated the darkness beyond, revealing what appeared to be a narrow corridor carved directly into the living rock beneath the lighthouse foundation. The tapping had stopped the moment he moved the stone, but Samuel's curiosity was now fully aroused. He had discovered something that wasn't supposed to exist, a hidden space that predated his 30 years of service, and possibly even the lighthouse itself. The corridor stretched away into darkness, its walls rough-hewn but purposeful, clearly the work of human hands rather than natural formation. Samuel squeezed through the opening and found himself in a passage about 4 feet wide and 6 feet high. The air was surprisingly dry for a space so close to the ocean, suggesting some form of natural or artificial ventilation. His footsteps echoed as he moved forward, the flashlight beam dancing ahead of him and revealing that the passage curved gently to the right, following the natural contours of the rocky headland. After about 50 feet, the passage opened into a larger chamber and Samuel's breath caught in his throat. The space was roughly circular, perhaps 20 feet across, with a domed ceiling that disappeared into shadow above his light. But it was what filled the chamber that left Samuel speechless. Along the walls stood wooden crates and barrels, their surfaces dark with age but remarkably well preserved in the dry air. Some bore markings that Samuel recognized as shipping symbols from the 19th century, while others carried text in what appeared to be Spanish or Portuguese. In the center of the chamber sat a large sea chest, its brass fittings green with verdigris but still intact. Samuel approached the chest cautiously, his mind racing with possibilities. This could be anything from a forgotten storage room to a smuggler's cache or perhaps even treasure hidden by pirates who once plagued these waters. The chest was locked, but the mechanism looked fragile enough that his pry bar might open it without too much damage. Before he could act on that impulse, Samuel heard something that made his blood run cold. Footsteps echoed from the passage behind him. Slow, deliberate steps that definitely weren't his own. Someone else was in the hidden chamber complex, and they were coming his way. Samuel quickly extinguished his flashlight and pressed himself against the wall beside one of the larger crates, his heart pounding in the darkness. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the beam of another light that began to illuminate the chamber. As the light swept across the space, Samuel caught a glimpse of the person carrying it, a woman in a dark coat, moving with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where they were going. The woman entered the chamber and went directly to the sea chest, producing a key from her coat pocket. As she unlocked and opened the chest, Samuel could see her face clearly in the reflected light. She was perhaps 40 years old, with sharp features and an expression of intense concentration. She reached into the chest and withdrew what appeared to be a leather-bound journal, quickly flipping through its pages as if searching for specific information. Samuel remained motionless, barely breathing, as the woman continued her examination of the chest's contents. She seemed to find what she was looking for, carefully placing the journal in her coat and replacing it with what looked like a modern manila envelope. After relocking the chest, she stood and surveyed the chamber one more time before heading back toward the passage. As her footsteps faded, Samuel waited several more minutes before turning his flashlight back on. His mind raced with questions. Who was this woman? And how did she know about the hidden chamber? Why did she have a key to the chest? And what had she been looking for in that journal? Samuel approached the chest and examined the lock more carefully. It was old but well maintained, and there were no signs that it had been forced. This woman had legitimate access to whatever secrets lay within, but that raised even more troubling questions about what Samuel had stumbled into. The tapping sound that had led him to this discovery now seemed less like random noise and more like a signal, perhaps even a warning. Someone had been trying to get his attention, to lead him to this hidden chamber. But who, and why now, after 30 years of silence? As Samuel made his way back through the passage to the lighthouse basement, his mind was full of questions, but one thing was clear. His quiet life as a lighthouse keeper had just become infinitely more complicated. Whatever secrets lay hidden beneath his lighthouse, they were important enough for someone to risk entering the chamber in the middle of a storm. And that meant Samuel was now part of something much larger than he had ever imagined. Back in the safety of his lighthouse, Samuel carefully replaced the stone block and did his best to disguise his evening's excavation work. But as he climbed back up to the lamp room to resume his watch, he knew there would be no sleep for him that night. The beam of his lighthouse continued its eternal rotation, but Samuel's world had fundamentally changed. He was no longer just a keeper of lights. He was now the guardian of a mystery that someone was willing to go to great lengths to keep secret. Part 2. Dawn broke gray and turbulent over Crescent Bay, the storm having passed but leaving behind a restless sea that crashed against the lighthouse rocks with persistent fury. Samuel had spent the sleepless night replaying the events in the hidden chamber, trying to make sense of what he'd witnessed. The image of the mysterious woman and her confident movements through the secret passage haunted him. She had moved through that space like someone who'd been there many times before. As morning light filled the lighthouse, Samuel made his routine weather observations and updated his logs, but his mind remained focused on the chamber below. He needed to understand what he'd stumbled into, and that meant learning more about the history of his lighthouse and the rocky headland it stood upon. After a quick breakfast of coffee and toast, Samuel drove his aging pickup truck along the coastal road to Crescent Bay's small downtown district. The town had perhaps 3,000 permanent residents, swelling to double that during the summer tourist season, but October meant the streets were quiet and the locals had reclaimed their community from the seasonal visitors. His first stop was the Crescent Bay Historical Society, housed in a converted Victorian mansion that overlooked the harbor. Eleanor Whitman, the society's curator and town historian, had been Samuel's occasional companion for dinner and local events since Margaret's death, though their relationship remained comfortably undefined. Eleanor was perhaps 10 years younger than Samuel, with silver-streaked auburn hair and the sharp intelligence of someone who had spent decades piecing together the stories hidden in old documents and fading photographs. "Samuel, you look like you've seen a ghost," Eleanor said as she opened the front door of the Historical Society building. "Rough night in the storm?" "Something like that," Samuel replied, following her into the main research room. "Eleanor, I need to ask you about the lighthouse history. Specifically about the foundation and any unusual construction details you might have records of." Eleanor raised an eyebrow as she settled behind her desk, which was covered with archival boxes and research materials for a book she was writing about the area's maritime history. "That's oddly specific. Is there a problem with the building?" Samuel chose his words carefully. "I found some irregularities in the basement foundation that got me curious about the original construction. Were there any modifications made to the lighthouse over the years that might not be in the official records?" Eleanor pulled out a thick folder labeled Crescent Bay Lighthouse, Construction and Modifications, and spread its contents across her desk. "Well, the lighthouse was built in 1847 by the Whitmore Construction Company out of Boston. The foundation work was supervised by a man named Thomas Blackwood, who had experience with coastal construction. But there are some gaps in the records." She pulled out a set of architectural drawings and pointed to specific sections. "These are the original plans, but there's a notation here about foundation modifications per site conditions that doesn't have corresponding detailed drawings. And there's this interesting correspondence." Eleanor handed Samuel a letter dated November 1847, written in the precise handwriting of the 19th century. The letter was from Thomas Blackwood to the lighthouse construction supervisor, discussing delays caused by unexpected geological discoveries and the need for specialized foundation work to accommodate existing site features. "What kind of existing site features?" Samuel asked, studying the letter more carefully. "That's where it gets interesting," Eleanor replied, pulling out a much older document. "This is a deed transfer from 1832 when the federal government acquired the land for the lighthouse. According to this, the property was previously owned by a Spanish trading company that operated out of Boston. The deed mentions existing improvements and installations that were to be preserved as part of the land transfer." Samuel felt a chill of recognition. The Spanish markings on some of the crates in the hidden chamber suddenly made more sense. "Do you have any records of what those existing improvements might have been?" Eleanor shook her head. "That's one of the mysteries I've been trying to solve for years. There are hints in various documents that Crescent Bay was used as a temporary depot for goods being transferred between ships, but nothing official. The Spanish were very active in New England trade during the early 1800s, often operating through intermediary companies to avoid political complications." She pulled out a map of the area from 1830 showing the headland before the lighthouse construction. "Look at this. There are notations for storage facilities and maintenance buildings right where your lighthouse now stands. But by the time the lighthouse was built, all trace of those earlier structures had supposedly been removed." Samuel studied the map intently. "Supposedly? Well, that's what the official records say. But I've always suspected that the lighthouse builders simply incorporated whatever was already there into their foundation work. It would have been much more practical than completely excavating and rebuilding everything from scratch." Eleanor gathered the documents and fixed Samuel with a questioning look. "Samuel, what exactly did you find in that basement?" Before Samuel could answer, the front door of the Historical Society opened and a woman entered. Samuel's breath caught. It was the same woman he'd seen in the hidden chamber the night before. In daylight, she appeared to be in her early 40s, professionally dressed in a dark business suit, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Excuse me," the woman said, approaching Eleanor's desk. "I'm Dr. Catherine Morse from the Maritime Archaeological Institute in Boston. I understand you're the local historian?" Eleanor stood and extended her hand. "Eleanor Whitman." "Yes, I'm the curator here. How can I help you?" "I'm researching historical shipping records for the Crescent Bay area, specifically focusing on Spanish trade operations from the early 19th century. I understand you have some archival materials that might be relevant to my research." Samuel remained silent, watching Dr. Confrey Morse carefully. She showed no sign of recognizing him, but her presence here, the day after her midnight visit to the chamber, couldn't be a coincidence. Eleanor began pulling out the same documents she'd just shown Samuel. As it happens, we were just discussing that very topic. We have some records suggesting that there was significant Spanish trading activity here before the lighthouse was built. Dr. Morse examined the documents with obvious expertise, asking detailed questions about dates, shipping manifests, and the location of historical storage facilities. Her questions were precise and knowledgeable, suggesting she knew far more about the subject than she was letting on. "Had you found any physical evidence of these trading operations?" Dr. Morse asked. "Storage areas, foundation remains, anything of that nature?" "Not that I'm aware of," Eleanor replied, glancing at Samuel. "Though I suppose such things could still exist. Old coastal installations were often built to last." Dr. Morse nodded thoughtfully. "I'm particularly interested in a company called Meridian Trading, which operated out of this area between 1825 and 1835. They were involved in some very specialized cargo operations. Do any of your records mention them specifically?" Eleanor searched through her files while Samuel watched Dr. Morse's face carefully. When Eleanor shook her head, indicating no records of Meridian Trading, Samuel caught a brief flash of frustration in the woman's expression. "I see, Dr. Dibb," Morse said. "Well, if anything turns up, I'd very much appreciate it if you'd contact me." She handed Eleanor a business card. "I'll be in the area for several more days conducting research." After Dr. Morse left, Eleanor turned to Samuel with obvious curiosity. "That was interesting timing. It's not often we get maritime archaeologists interested in our little town." Samuel studied the business card Eleanor was holding. "May I see that?" The card was professionally printed with Dr. Catherine Morse's name and the Maritime Archaeological Institute logo, but something about it bothered Samuel. He pulled out his phone and searched for the Maritime Archaeological Institute in Boston. The organization existed and had an impressive website, but when he searched specifically for Dr. Catherine Morse, he found no mention of her anywhere. "Eleanor," Samuel said carefully, "I think that woman may not be who she claims to be." Eleanor frowned. "What makes you say that?" "Just a feeling. Can you do me a favor and not share any more information about the lighthouse or the Spanish trading activities with anyone else for a while? At least until I can figure out what's going on." "Samuel, you're starting to worry me. What exactly have you discovered?" Samuel looked around the empty Historical Society building and made a decision. "Can we go somewhere private? I need to show you something, but it has to stay strictly between us for now." Eleanor nodded slowly. "My office is private. Samuel, are you in some kind of trouble?" "I don't know yet," Samuel replied honestly, "but I think I may have stumbled into something that people are willing to go to considerable lengths to keep secret, and I'm not sure who I can trust." As they moved toward Eleanor's private office, Samuel's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Stop digging or face consequences. Some secrets are meant to stay buried." Samuel showed the message to Eleanor, whose face went pale. "Samuel, I think you need to call the police." "Maybe," Samuel replied, though something told him that local law enforcement might not be equipped to handle whatever he'd uncovered. "But first, let me tell you what I found last night. Then we can decide what to do about it." As Samuel began to recount his discovery of the hidden chamber, he couldn't shake the feeling that Dr. Double discussed. Morse, or whoever she really was, already knew exactly what lay beneath the lighthouse. The question was whether she was trying to protect those secrets or exploit them, and what she might be willing to do to achieve her goals. Part 3, Eleanor's office at the back of the Historical Society building was a cramped but comfortable space filled with filing cabinets, research materials, and the accumulated detritus of decades spent preserving local history. As Samuel recounted his discovery of the hidden chamber and his encounter with the mysterious Dr. Morse, Eleanor listened with growing alarm and fascination. "You're telling me there's an entire secret chamber beneath the lighthouse, filled with what appears to be 19th century cargo, and this woman just happened to show up with a key the next morning?" Eleanor asked, leaning back in her desk chair. "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Samuel replied, showing her the threatening text message again. "And now someone's warning me to stop investigating." "This isn't some random archaeological find, Eleanor. People are actively trying to keep this secret." Eleanor studied the business card from Dr. Morse, turning it over in her hands. "The timing is certainly suspicious, but maritime archaeologists do sometimes research historical trading operations. And if there really is a chamber full of Spanish trade goods beneath the lighthouse, she had a key, Eleanor. She didn't break in or pick a lock. She had a key to a chest that's been sealed in that chamber for possibly 2 centuries. How do you explain that?" Before Eleanor could respond, her phone rang. She answered with her usual professional greeting, but her expression quickly changed to one of concern. Yes. This is Eleanor Whitman. What? When did this happen? I see. No, I'll come right away. She hung up and turned to Samuel with obvious distress. That was the police. Someone broke into the Historical Society last night. They didn't take anything obvious, but my files have been searched through. The police want me to come down and see if I can determine what might have been taken. Samuel felt a chill of realization. The same files you just showed me about the Spanish trading operations. Exactly. Eleanor began gathering her purse and keys. Samuel, I think you need to seriously consider that you may have stumbled into something dangerous. Someone is clearly very interested in keeping information about that chamber from becoming public. Or, they're looking for something specific, Samuel said thoughtfully. Dr. Costile, Morse, or whoever she is, took something from that chest last night and left something else in its place. Maybe she's not trying to hide the chamber's existence. Maybe she's trying to find something that's supposed to be there. Eleanor paused in her preparations to leave. What kind of something? I don't know, but I intend to find out. I'm going back down to that chamber tonight, with or without official permission. Samuel, that's not safe. If people are willing to break into the Historical Society and send threatening messages, what might they do if they catch you in that chamber again? Samuel considered this soberly. Then I'll have to make sure they don't catch me. But Eleanor, I can't just pretend I never found that place. There are secrets down there that someone has been protecting for decades, maybe longer. And whatever those secrets are, they're important enough that people are still actively managing them. Eleanor locked her office and they walked toward the front of the building together. What if we called in the state police? Or the FBI? If this involves smuggling or other federal crimes, with what evidence? Everything I've seen could have innocent explanations, except for the woman with the key. And she's supposedly a legitimate researcher. Without proof of wrongdoing, law enforcement isn't going to be interested in pursuing this. As they reached the front door, Eleanor stopped and turned to Samuel. There is another option. I have a contact at the Real Maritime Archaeological Institute in Boston, someone I worked with on a shipwreck documentation project last year. If Dr. Morse is really who she claims to be, he'll know her. If she's not, that's a good idea. Can you call him today? I'll call him from the police station. Eleanor hesitated, then reached out and took Samuel's hand. Promise me you'll be careful tonight. Whatever's in that chamber has been there for a very long time. It can wait another day or two while we figure out what we're dealing with. Samuel squeezed her hand gently. I'll be careful. But I'm not backing down from this, Eleanor. Someone led me to that chamber for a reason, and I intend to find out what it was. After Eleanor left for the police station, Samuel drove back to the lighthouse, his mind working through the implications of the morning's events. The break-in at the Historical Society confirmed that he'd stumbled into something significant, but it also meant that his investigation was now known to whoever was protecting the chamber's secrets. Back at the lighthouse, Samuel spent the afternoon researching maritime archaeology and Spanish trading operations on his computer. What he found was fascinating but frustrating. There were numerous references to covert Spanish trading operations along the New England coast during the early 19th century, often involving goods that couldn't pass through official customs channels for political or legal reasons. The Spanish had been involved in complex international trade relationships during this period, often using intermediary companies and temporary storage facilities to move goods without attracting unwanted attention from American or British authorities. Some sources suggested that valuable cargo was sometimes hidden in secure locations during periods of political tension, to be retrieved when circumstances became more favorable. Around 4 p.m, Samuel's phone rang. Eleanor's voice was tense with excitement when he answered. Samuel, I spoke with my contact at the Maritime Archaeological Institute. Dr. Catherine Morse doesn't exist. There's no one by that name affiliated with the institute, and they have no current research projects in the Crescent Bay area. Samuel felt a mixture of vindication and apprehension, so she's definitely not who she claims to be. That's right. But Samuel, there's more. My contact did some checking with colleagues at other institutions, and it turns out someone matching Dr. Morse's description has been asking questions about Spanish trading operations at historical societies and maritime museums all along the New England coast for the past 6 months. The same question she asked you? Very similar questions, always focusing on meridian trading and storage facilities from the 1825 to 1835 period. She's been very thorough, visiting institutions from Maine to Connecticut. Samuel processed this information carefully. So she's conducting some kind of systematic research project, but not through any legitimate academic institution. That suggests she's working for someone else, someone with significant resources and a very specific agenda. Samuel, The police found something else when they investigated the break-in here. There were traces of some kind of electronic surveillance equipment in my office. Very sophisticated stuff that the local police had never seen before. Someone was listening to our conversation this morning. The implications hit Samuel like a physical blow, which means they know I found the chamber, they know about our conversation, and they know you're helping me investigate. I'm afraid so. Samuel, I think we need to consider that you may be in real danger. These aren't casual treasure hunters or amateur historians. This is organized and professional. Samuel looked out at the lighthouse beam beginning its nightly rotation as dusk approached. Then I need to move fast. If they know what I've discovered, they'll either try to stop me from investigating further, or they'll move whatever they're protecting to a different location. Samuel, please don't go down to that chamber tonight. Give me a chance to contact some federal authorities who might be able to help. Eleanor, if I wait, whatever evidence exists in that chamber may disappear. Tonight might be my only chance to document what's down there and figure out what this is all about. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then don't go alone. Eleanor said finally, I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. If this is dangerous, then you shouldn't be doing it either. But if you're determined to go, then I'm not letting you go by yourself. Besides, I'm the historian here. If there are documents or artifacts down there, I'm much more likely than you are to understand their significance. Samuel wanted to protest, but he recognized the stubborn determination in Eleanor's voice. It was the same tone she used when arguing with the town council about historical preservation funding. All right, he said reluctantly, but we do this carefully, and we document everything. If something happens to us, I want evidence left behind that will allow others to understand what we found. Agreed. I'll bring my digital camera and my portable scanner. Whatever's in that chamber, we'll create a complete record of it. As Samuel ended the call and prepared for the night's investigation, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was crossing a line from which there might be no return. The lighthouse beam swept across the darkening waters just as it had for nearly 2 centuries, but beneath that familiar light lay secrets that someone had killed to protect and might kill again to keep hidden. The tapping sound that had started everything remained silent, but Samuel suspected that whatever entity or circumstance had led him to the chamber was far from finished with him. Tonight would either provide answers to the questions that had consumed him for the past 24 hours, or it would plunge him deeper into a mystery that was growing more dangerous by the hour. Part 4. Eleanor arrived at the lighthouse just after sunset, carrying a backpack filled with photography equipment, portable lighting, and documentation materials. She had also brought something Samuel hadn't expected, a laptop computer with satellite internet connectivity. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it right, she explained as they prepared their equipment in the lighthouse's main room. Everything we find gets documented and uploaded to a secure cloud server in real time. If something happens to us, at least the evidence will survive. Samuel had spent the late afternoon preparing his own supplies, additional flashlights, tools for examining artifacts, and a small crowbar in case they needed to open any of the containers in the chamber. He had also written a detailed account of everything that had happened so far, sealed it in an envelope, and left it in a prominent place where it would be easily found if he and Eleanor disappeared. Are you sure about this, Eleanor? Once we go down there, there's no telling what we might find or who might try to stop us. Eleanor shouldered her backpack with determination. Samuel, I've spent my entire career studying the history of this area. If there's a cache of artifacts from the Spanish trading period hidden beneath this lighthouse, it could rewrite everything we know about early 19th century commerce along this coast. I'm not missing this opportunity. They made their way to the basement, and Samuel showed Eleanor the stone he had displaced to access the hidden passage. In the beam of their flashlights, the opening looked even more ominous than it had the night before, a dark mouth leading into the unknown depths beneath the lighthouse foundation. The passage is narrow, Samuel warned as they squeezed through the opening. And the chamber at the end is larger, but we'll need to be careful not to disturb anything unnecessarily. Eleanor followed Samuel through the passage, her equipment making soft scraping sounds against the stone walls. When they emerged into the main chamber, her gasp of amazement echoed in the enclosed space. Samuel, this is incredible. Look at the preservation. Everything is exactly as it was left decades ago, maybe longer. Eleanor immediately began setting up her photography equipment while Samuel directed his flashlight beam around the chamber, taking a more systematic inventory than he'd been able to manage during his first hurried visit. The wooden crates and barrels were arranged with obvious organization, not randomly stored but carefully positioned according to some logical system. Eleanor, look at the markings on these containers. They're not just shipping labels, they're inventory codes. Eleanor moved closer to examine the markings Samuel was indicating. You're right. This is a systematic storage system, not temporary hiding place. Someone was planning to maintain this cache for an extended period. She photographed each container methodically, while Samuel examined the sea chest in the center of the chamber. The lock that the mysterious Dr. Morse had opened with her key showed signs of regular use. The brass was worn smooth, and the mechanism moved easily despite its apparent age. Samuel, I want to examine what's inside that chest, but I think we should document everything else first. If someone comes looking for us, the chest is probably what they'll be most interested in. They spent the next 2 hours creating a comprehensive photographic record of the chamber. Eleanor's expertise proved invaluable as she identified specific markings and symbols that indicated the origin and likely contents of various containers. Many of the crates bore the markings of Spanish trading companies from the early 1800s, but others showed symbols that Eleanor didn't immediately recognize. These markings here, she said, pointing to a series of containers along the far wall. They're not Spanish. They look more like cipher codes or some kind of inventory system designed to obscure rather than identify contents. Samuel examined the containers Eleanor indicated. You think some of this cargo wasn't legitimate trade goods? I think some of this cargo was never intended to pass through official customs channels. Look at this. Eleanor had found a container with markings that included what appeared to be a date, 1834. If this dating is accurate, these goods were stored here just 1 year before the Spanish trading company sold the land to the federal government for the lighthouse construction. So they were preparing to abandon this site, Samuel said thoughtfully. But they left all this cargo behind. Why wouldn't they retrieve their goods before selling the property? Eleanor lowered her camera and looked around the chamber with a new perspective. What if they couldn't retrieve it? What if something happened that prevented them from coming back for their cargo? Before Samuel could respond to this troubling possibility, they heard something that made them both freeze. The sound of voices coming from the passage leading to the lighthouse basement. Someone else was in the hidden tunnel system, and they were heading toward the chamber. Eleanor quickly shut off her portable lights, while Samuel extinguished his flashlight. In the complete darkness of the underground chamber, they could hear at least 2 people moving through the passage, speaking in low voices that echoed off the stone walls. Should have secured this location immediately after the old man made his discovery, one voice was saying. Instructions were to monitor and assess before taking action. We needed to determine what he knew, and whether he had shared information with anyone else, replied a second voice, this one female and familiar. Samuel realized with a chill that the second voice belonged to Dr. Hansen, Catherine Morse, the woman who had visited the chamber the previous night. But now she was accompanied by at least one other person, and their conversations suggested a level of organization and planning that went far beyond simple archaeological research. Eleanor grabbed Samuel's arm in the darkness, and he could feel her trembling. They were trapped in the chamber with no way out except through the passage where the intruders were approaching. Samuel began to consider their options, none of which seemed particularly promising. The voices grew closer, and soon the beam of powerful flashlights began to illuminate the chamber entrance. Samuel and Eleanor pressed themselves behind one of the larger crates, hoping to remain concealed until they could determine the intentions of their unexpected visitors. Dr. Morse entered the chamber first, followed by a man in dark clothing who moved with the bearing of someone with military or law enforcement training. Dr. Fordinen. Morse went directly to the sea chest while her companion began examining the other containers with obvious familiarity. The material we need should still be in the chest, Dr. Morse said, producing her key, but we need to verify that our friend the lighthouse keeper didn't remove anything important during his visit. And if he did? The man asked, his voice carrying a tone that made Samuel's blood run cold. Then we'll need to have a very serious conversation with him about the importance of leaving historical sites undisturbed. Dr. Morse opened the chest and began examining its contents with a small but powerful LED light. Samuel could see her removing various items. Documents, what appeared to be maps or charts, and several small objects that might have been jewelry or decorative items. Everything appears to be intact, she reported. But Thomas, I'm concerned about the level of interest this discovery is generating. The lighthouse keeper has been asking questions, and now the local historian is involved as well. The man called Thomas moved closer to the chest. Dr. Chen's instructions were clear. Maintain security of this site at all costs. The implications of these materials becoming public would be significant. Samuel felt Eleanor stiffen beside him at the mention of someone called Dr. Chen. The name meant nothing to Samuel, but Eleanor's reaction suggested it might have significance that she understood. Dr. Morse selected several items from the chest and placed them in a waterproof case she had brought with her. I'll take these back to Dr. Chen for analysis. The rest can remain here for now, but we need to implement enhanced security measures immediately. What kind of enhanced security? Thomas asked. The kind that ensures no unauthorized persons have access to this chamber. Dr. Morse replied in a tone that left little doubt about what she meant. Samuel realized that he and Eleanor were in immediate danger. These people were not simply researchers or treasure hunters. They were part of an organized operation with resources and a willingness to use violence to protect their interests. He began to consider whether they could escape through the passage while Dr. Morse and Thomas were focused on the chest. But before he could act on that plan, Thomas's flashlight beam swept across their hiding place and landed directly on Eleanor's face. "Dr. Morse," Thomas said quietly, "we have company." Dr. Morse spun around, her own light joining Thomas's to illuminate Samuel and Eleanor's hiding place. "Mr. Torres and Ms. Whitman, I presume? How convenient that you've saved us the trouble of coming to find you." Samuel helped Eleanor to her feet, his mind racing through possible escape scenarios, but Thomas had moved to block the passage exit, and Samuel could see that the man was armed with what appeared to be a military-style pistol. "Dr. Morse," Eleanor said, her voice steadier than Samuel had expected. "Or should I say, whoever you really are, you're making a serious mistake. People know where we are, and if we disappear, there will be investigations." Dr. Perot Palapis said one day these were perfectly planned. Morse smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "Miss Spray, Whitman, I think you'll find that our organization has considerable experience in managing complications. Now, I need to know exactly what you've discovered, what you've documented, and who else you've shared information with." Samuel stepped forward, protectively. "We haven't heard anything or taken anything from this chamber. We were just documenting what we found for historical purposes." "I'm afraid that's not entirely true, Mr. Bird. Torres, your documentation efforts could compromise a very important ongoing operation that has been in place for decades and has implications far beyond your simple historical curiosity." Thomas checked his watch and nodded to Dr. Morse. "We're running out of time. Dr. Chen needs those materials tonight, and we still have to deal with the security breach." Dr. Morse nodded in return. "Torres, Miss Whitman, I need you to understand something very clearly. You have stumbled into matters of national security that are far beyond your ability to comprehend or manage. The contents of this chamber represent more than just historical artifacts. They are evidence of operations that could damage relationships between allied nations if they became public." Eleanor found her voice again. "What kind of operations?" "The kind that sometimes require people to disappear permanently," Thomas said flatly. As the full implications of their situation became clear, Samuel realized that their midnight investigation had led them into something much more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The secrets hidden beneath his lighthouse weren't just historical curiosities. They were active elements in some kind of ongoing operation involving people with the resources and ruthlessness to kill in order to protect their interests. Part 5. Dr. Morse studied Samuel and Eleanor for a long moment, her expression calculating. The chamber fell silent except for the distant sound of wind and waves above them, a reminder of the normal world that now seemed impossibly far away. "Thomas, secure the entrance." "Dr. Morse said finally. "I need to make a call." Thomas moved toward the passage, while Dr. Morse pulled out a sophisticated satellite phone. Samuel noted that the device was far more advanced than anything a university researcher would typically carry, further confirming that these people represented something much more serious than academic fraud. "Dr. Chen, this is Morse. We have a significant security breach at Site 7. Yes, both subjects are present." "Understood, sir." She ended the call and turned back to Samuel and Eleanor with an expression that was somehow both apologetic and threatening. "I'm afraid you've put us all in a very difficult position," she said. "The operation you've stumbled into has been running continuously since 1847, making it one of the longest-standing intelligence operations in American history. The contents of this chamber aren't just historical artifacts. They're an active dead drop that has been in use for nearly 2 centuries. Eleanor found her voice first. "Intelligence operation? What kind of intelligence operation?" Dr. Morse gestured to the containers around them. The Spanish trading company that originally operated from this site wasn't just engaged in legitimate commerce. They were part of an early intelligence network that helped monitor British naval activities and European political developments that could affect American interests. When the federal government acquired this land for the lighthouse, they didn't eliminate the intelligence operation, they incorporated it into the lighthouse infrastructure. Samuel felt pieces of a massive puzzle beginning to fall into place. The lighthouse keepers had been part of this operation? Not all of them, but selected keepers have served as caretakers for this facility when needed. The position provides perfect cover for an intelligence drop site. Lighthouse keepers are expected to be present at all hours. They have legitimate reasons to access all parts of the building, and their movements don't attract attention from local authorities. And my predecessors knew about this? Some did. Others were kept unaware unless circumstances required their involvement. You, Mr. Torres, were supposed to remain unaware. Your discovery of this chamber represents a serious breach of operational security. Thomas returned from the passage entrance. Site is secured. No immediate signs of additional surveillance or backup. Dr. Morse nodded. Mr. Torres, Ms. Whitman, I'm going to be very direct with you. This operation serves important national security interests, and it cannot be compromised. You have two options. You can agree to maintain absolute secrecy about what you've discovered and accept oversight of your activities going forward, or she let the alternative hang in the air, but Thomas's presence and obvious weapons made the implication clear. Eleanor stepped forward with surprising courage. You're asking us to become part of a conspiracy that we don't understand, to protect operations that may or may not be legitimate, and to trust people who have already lied to us about their identities and intentions. I'm asking you to consider the greater good. Dr. Morse replied. The intelligence gathered through this operation has prevented conflicts, saved lives, and protected American interests for generations. Sometimes maintaining that capability requires difficult choices. Samuel had been listening to this exchange while studying the chamber more carefully. Something about Dr. Morse's story didn't quite fit with what he was observing. If this is such an important ongoing operation, he said, why did I hear tapping sounds that led me to discover the chamber? If you wanted to keep this secret, why was someone trying to get my attention? Dr. Morse's expression flickered with what might have been uncertainty. What do you mean tapping sounds? For 3 nights before I found the passage, I heard rhythmic tapping coming from behind the basement wall. That's what led me to investigate and discover the loose stone. If this is your operation, who was doing the tapping? Thomas moved closer to Dr. Morse. That wasn't part of the operation protocol? Dr. Morse pulled out a handheld device and began scanning the chamber. After a few moments, she stopped and stared at the readout with obvious concern. Thomas, we have a problem. This chamber is showing electronic activity that doesn't match our equipment signatures. Eleanor grabbed Samuel's arm. The tapping sounds. What if someone else has been trying to expose this operation? What if we're not the only people who know about this chamber? Before anyone could respond to Eleanor's suggestion, the lights in the chamber began to flicker. Not their flashlights, but actual electric lighting that Samuel was certain hadn't been there before. Ancient-looking fixtures mounted on the walls suddenly illuminated with a warm, steady glow that revealed details of the chamber they hadn't been able to see clearly in their flashlight beams. Dr. Morse raised her weapon, scanning the chamber for threats, while Thomas moved to cover the passage entrance. But the source of the lighting wasn't visible. The fixtures appeared to be activated by some automated system. Motion sensors, Thomas said tersely. Someone's been watching this chamber. A voice echoed from speakers that were apparently built into the chamber walls, an elderly male voice with a slight accent that Samuel couldn't immediately identify. Dr. Morse, or should I say, Agent Morrison of the CIA's Special Activities Division. Your cover has been blown for quite some time. Dr. Morse spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice. Who is this? Identify yourself immediately. My name is Dr. Antonio Vasquez, and I am the grandson of the man who originally designed this facility in 1834. For the past 40 years, I have been documenting the illegal use of this historical site by intelligence agencies that have no legitimate claim to its contents. The voice continued, seeming to come from all directions. Mr. Torres, Miss Whitman, you are not in immediate danger, but you are also not free to leave until this situation is resolved. What you have discovered tonight is not a legitimate intelligence operation. It is an illegal appropriation of historical artifacts and a violation of several federal laws regarding the handling of archaeological sites. Samuel felt a wave of relief mixed with new confusion. Dr. Vasquez, where are you? I am in a monitoring station that my grandfather built into the cliff face adjacent to this chamber. I have been waiting for years for someone with legitimate historical interests to discover this site so that I could finally expose the illegal activities that have been taking place here. Dr. Morse, or Agent Morrison, was speaking urgently into her satellite phone, but seemed to be having difficulty establishing a connection. Agent Morrison, Dr. Vasquez's voice continued, your communication equipment will not function while you remain in this chamber. The same shielding that has protected this site from electronic detection for the past century also prevents outgoing transmissions. Thomas moved toward the passage, but stopped when additional lighting revealed that the entrance had been sealed by what appeared to be a massive stone slab that had descended from the ceiling. The lockdown protocol was installed by my grandfather as a security measure. Dr. Vasquez explained. "It can only be overridden from my monitoring station. Agent Morrison, I suggest you and your associates surrender your weapons. You are completely isolated and surrounded." Agent Morrison raised her weapon in the direction of the speakers. "Dr. Howard Vasquez, you are interfering with a classified government operation. If you don't stand down immediately, you'll be charged with treason." "Agent Morrison, the operation you're referring to was terminated by presidential directive in 1962. What you and your colleagues have been conducting here for the past 3 decades is an unauthorized intelligence operation using misappropriated government resources. I have documented evidence of every transaction, every personnel visit, and every illegal removal of historical artifacts from this site." Eleanor moved closer to Samuel. "Samuel, I think we've stumbled into something much bigger than we realized." The voice of Dr. Vasquez filled the chamber again. "Miss Whitman is correct. This site contains evidence of intelligence operations spanning nearly 2 centuries, but also evidence of massive corruption and illegal activities by government personnel who have used their access to steal and sell historical artifacts for personal profit." Agent Morrison's face had gone pale. "That's impossible. Our operations here are completely classified and legal." Agent Morrison, the real doctor. "Catherine Morse is a legitimate archaeological researcher who has been investigating the illegal antiquities trade. You killed her 6 months ago and assumed her identity to gain access to historical sites along the New England coast. The man you know as Thomas is actually Viktor Petrov, a former Russian intelligence operative who has been selling American intelligence secrets for the past decade." The man called Thomas or Victor raised his weapon toward the speakers, but Dr. Vasquez's voice continued calmly. "Petrov, your weapon will not function in this chamber. The electromagnetic field that powers our systems also disrupts the firing mechanisms of modern firearms. A safety feature my grandfather included after learning about the violent history of some intelligence operations." Samuel watched as both Agent Morrison and Victor frantically tried to operate their weapons, which indeed appeared to have been disabled by whatever technology was protecting the chamber. "Dr. Vasquez," Samuel called out, "what exactly is this place?" "Mr. Torres, you and Ms. Whitman have discovered the oldest continuously operating intelligence facility in North America. It was built by my grandfather, Dr. Miguel Vasquez, in 1834 as part of an agreement with the American government to monitor European activities that could threaten the young nation. But over the decades, various groups have corrupted its purpose, using it for personal gain rather than national security." Eleanor stepped forward. "Dr. Vasquez, why did you wait so long to expose this? Why not go to the authorities years ago?" "Miss Whitman, until recently I had no way to prove that the activities here were illegal rather than classified. It was only when I learned that the real Dr. Evans, Morse, had been murdered and her identity stolen that I realized the current operation was completely corrupt. I needed witnesses with credible backgrounds to help me expose what has been happening here." Agent Morrison sat down heavily on one of the crates, her facade of authority crumbling. "How long have you been monitoring us?" "Agent Morrison, I have been documenting every visit to this chamber for the past 40 years. I have recordings of conversations, photographs of stolen artifacts, and financial records showing how historical treasures have been sold to private collectors. You and your associates have stolen millions of dollars worth of artifacts and compromised American intelligence operations in the process." Victor moved around the chamber, apparently looking for alternative exits, but the walls appeared to be solid rock with no hidden passages. "Mr. Petrov," Dr. Vasquez continued, "you should stop looking for escape routes. This facility was designed by someone who understood the importance of security. The only way out is through cooperation." Samuel felt the weight of everything that had happened settling on his shoulders. "Dr. Vasquez, what happens now?" "Mr. Kaufman, Taurus, I am transmitting all of my evidence to federal authorities as we speak. FBI agents should arrive at the lighthouse within the hour to take Agent Morrison and Mr. Kennedy Petrov into custody. You and Ms. Whitman will be asked to provide testimony about what you've witnessed, but you are not in any legal jeopardy." Eleanor squeezed Samuel's hand. "And the chamber? What happens to all of this?" Ms. Brycass asks. "Whitman, this site will finally be turned over to legitimate archaeological authorities for proper study and preservation. The artifacts here represent an invaluable record of early American intelligence operations and Spanish trading activities. They belong in a museum, not in the private collections of corrupt government officials." As if on cue, they could hear sounds from above, vehicles arriving, voices calling out, and what sounded like official activity at the lighthouse. "Dr. Vasquez," Samuel said, "thank you for keeping us safe. But I have one more question. Who was doing the tapping that led me to discover the passage?" There was a pause before Dr. Vasquez replied, And when he spoke, Samuel detected a note of affection in his voice. "Mr. Torres, that was my grandfather's final innovation. He installed a monitoring system that would automatically alert the lighthouse keeper if anyone accessed this chamber without authorization. The tapping you heard was the system trying to warn you that unauthorized personnel were using the facility. In a sense, my grandfather has been trying to tell someone about the illegal activities here for decades. You were simply the first lighthouse keeper curious enough to investigate." As federal agents began calling down through the passage, Samuel reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had started with mysterious tapping sounds and led to the exposure of a decades-long criminal conspiracy. His quiet life as a lighthouse keeper had been permanently changed, but he realized that he had been exactly where he was supposed to be, when he was supposed to be there. The lighthouse above continued its eternal rotation, sending its beam across the dark waters just as it had for nearly 2 centuries. But now the secrets it had protected were finally coming to light, and Samuel Torres had played an essential role in ensuring that justice would be served and history would be preserved for future generations. 3 months later, the Crescent Bay Lighthouse was designated a National Historic Landmark, with Samuel continuing as its keeper but now also serving as director of the new Maritime Intelligence Museum that was established in the restored underground chambers. Eleanor became the museum's chief curator, and together they worked to ensure that the fascinating and complex history of the site would be preserved for researchers and the public. Dr. Antonio Vasquez finally emerged from his decades of hidden surveillance to become the museum's chief historical consultant, sharing stories of his grandfather's ingenious engineering and the site's remarkable role in American intelligence history. The real Dr. Catherine Morse was posthumously honored for her work exposing the illegal antiquities trade, and Agent Morrison and Victor Petrov were sentenced to long prison terms for their crimes. The lighthouse beam still sweeps across Crescent Bay each night, but now it illuminates not just safe passage for ships, but also the truth about a remarkable piece of American history that had been hidden in the darkness for far too long. Samuel Torres learned that sometimes the most important discoveries come not from seeking adventure, but from having the courage to investigate the mysteries that present themselves in ordinary life. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is just right, visitors to the lighthouse report hearing faint tapping sounds from the chambers below. Not a warning this time, but perhaps a signal of approval from the past, acknowledging that the secrets are finally safe in the light.